Hello. Today's assignment is called Possibilities. It is a mentor text assignment. It is written by Wislawa Szymborska. Our objective is to read and analyze the mentor text poem called Possibilities. Then students will write their own I prefer list with similar insights about themselves. You will write at least 10 up to 20 sentences starting with I prefer. You want to include irony, contradiction, and if possible, understatement. Who is Wislawa Szymborska? She was born July 2nd, 1923. She is a beloved poet, essayist, translator, and she is the recipient of the 1996 Nobel Prize in Literature. Many of her poems feature war and terrorism. She is often described as modest and shy. She has long been cherished by Polish literacy contemporaries. A Nobel Prize are Nobel Prizes are 5 separate prizes that, according to Alfred Nobel's will of 1895, they are awarded to those who, during the preceding year, have conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. And they are awarded in physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, literature, and peace. Wislawa Szymborska was awarded the 1996 Nobel Prize in Literature for poetry that with ironic precision allows the historical and biological context to come to light in fragments of human reality. Szymborska is known for creating philosophical themes. Examples of philosophical themes would be it is easier to love. Is it easier to love or be loved? Does living your life for others make your life have meaning? How does one find purpose in life? If death is inevitable, why bother doing anything? And of course, our philosophers are Plato, some of the ones that we know, Aristotle, lots of different philosophy that involves ethics and logic, and of course, pathos. She frequently uses literary devices such as irony, contradiction, and understatement. Irony is the opposite, or typically for humorous effect. An example of irony is the blind leading the blind, or I'm so glad I have such a tiny little lap dog. So irony is the opposite of what is typical. Contradiction is opposing ideas, things like no pets allowed and all pets must be on a leash. So it's like, okay, so there's no pets allowed, but if you do have a pet, they have to be on a leash. So very contradictory ideas. The blue button is true, the red button is false, and so it's contradicts each other. And understatement, which is suggesting something is smaller, worse, or less important than it is. An example is looks like last night it rained a bit. Okay, so it looks like it rained a bit last night, and here the car is flooding, so that's an understatement. So for the poem Possibilities, we are going to be looking for things like irony, contradiction, and if we can find it, some understatement. Here's our poem. I prefer movies. I prefer cats. I prefer the oaks along the river. I prefer myself liking people to myself loving mankind. I prefer keeping a needle and thread on hand just in case. I prefer the color green. I prefer not to maintain that reason is to blame for everything. I prefer exceptions. I prefer to leave early. I prefer talking to doctors about something else. I prefer the old fine-lined illustrations. I prefer the absurdity of writing poems to the absurdity of not writing poems. I prefer cunning kindness to the over-trustful kind. I prefer casual over formal. I prefer conquered to conquering countries. I prefer having some reservations. I prefer Grimm's fairy tales to the newspaper's front covers or front pages. I prefer leaves without flowers to flowers without leaves. I prefer dogs with uncropped tails. I prefer light eyes, since mine are dark. I prefer desk drawers. I prefer many things that I haven't mentioned here. Too many things I also left unsaid. I prefer zeros on the loose to those lined up behind a code. I prefer the time of insects to the time of stars. I prefer to knock on wood. I prefer not to ask how much longer and when. I prefer keeping in mind even the possibility that existence has its own reason for being. So that's her poem. Some things that I find ironical, which would be opposites, is I prefer movies. She's an author. She writes stories. She's known as a famous author who writes about important things. And yet she says, I prefer movies. And typically somebody who likes to read or write, they prefer to read the book. The book is better. She says, I prefer myself liking people to myself loving mankind. And it kind of seems like a contradiction. She likes particular people. She does not particularly like mankind in general. She says, I prefer keeping a needle and thread on hand just in case. So we know she likes to be prepared. She knows that sometimes life gets messy and needs to be fixed. I prefer the color green, and there are a lot of symbolic meanings to the color green. Green is new life. Typically, green also represents money or stability. So, or lucky, the lucky green color. So green is a positive color. I don't know what she meant by it though. She says, I prefer talking to doctors about something else. And there is definitely some contradiction because a doctor is there to talk to us about our health. And when you talk to a doctor, it's in order to talk to them about how to get better. And of course, she's like, yeah, I prefer something else. And I prefer casual over formal. And that's just more about her personality. She prefers the conquered to the conquering countries. So if she has to choose, she wants to go for the underdog, not the one who is causing the war. She goes, this is a big one. This is the irony. I prefer Grimm's fairy tales, which are very creepy, scary tales, to the newspaper's front pages. So it tells you a bit about the time period, the wars, and the things that were going on in her time period. I'll let you go through and look for irony and contradiction on the rest of these. But those are a few thoughts that come to mind as I read these. Next is you can write your own possibilities poem in your journal. You would start off with writing an I prefer list. You can go up to 20. I would say you could do 10 strong, up to 20. I prefer. So you're going to write I prefer. This is from The Possibilities by Wislawa Szymborska. She is Polish. Number your papers 1 to 20. And then start your I prefer. I prefer coffee in the morning with cream, tea in the afternoon on ice. You can move on down. Movies with popcorn sprinkled with salt. Laughter when learning. I prefer long hikes in the cool mountains and lazy days in hammocks. I prefer reading the book before watching the movie. Country roads over the highway. RV camping over a luxury hotel. Pre-AP sage over regular. Ugly truths instead of pretty lies. I prefer to include over exclude, which is pretty deep. So you write your list and then we will share it with our neighbors. And I hope you enjoy this poem.